Hey guys, today I'll show you a horror thriller TV series named Tales from the Crypt, Season 4. Spoilers ahead, watch out and take care. The first story begins with the 70th birthday of an old lady. The thoughtful Howard prepared a lavish dinner for his old wife and even opened a bottle of outdated wine. After a glass of wine and a barrage of sweet talk from Howard, his wife cheerfully signed the property transfer agreement. He then recited some sophisticated poetry to her. Not long after, his wife clutched her chest and passed away. Howard calmly picked up the phone and called an ambulance for his late wife. His wife passed away and Howard inherited millions in assets. He almost burst out laughing despite his supposed grief at the funeral. After the guests left, his partner came forward to congratulate him, saying another one down, but Howard urged him to shut up his smelly mouth since he was doing his job. Now, the two of them had a whopping $5 million in their accounts. But the partner suggested that it was time to quit while they were ahead and go enjoy a quiet life on a small island. Howard, however, thought that a few $1 million wasn't nearly enough to live it up. He planned to pull off one last big score before retiring. Their conversation was overheard by a cemetery worker in the corner, but the worker kept silent. Back at his apartment, Howard began searching for his next target on a matchmaking show. A lonely, elegant old socialite caught his eye. She had an air of sophistication, and the jewelry she wore looked extremely valuable. Howard quickly took her video to a matchmaking agency to inquire about her. From the matchmaker, he got the old lady's address. The old lady was very wealthy, and after her husband passed away, she had only her loyal butler for company. Howard visited the old lady with roses in hand, claiming that he was wealthy too, and that his attraction to her was purely because of her charm. Howard was a seasoned scammer. The two of them chatted about everything from poetry to life goals, and he quickly won the old lady's heart. That very night, Howard stayed at the old lady's home and spent the hormone night with her. After their passionate night together, Howard received an anonymous letter warning him to back off while he still could. Howard assumed that his partner was trying to threaten him. At that moment, his partner was busy destroying all the evidence of their crimes, planning to flee with Howard in a few days. But the wicked Howard mercilessly pushed his unsuspecting partner into a shredder. With his partner dead as pieces of shit, Howard no longer had anything holding him back. He soon married the old lady, and on the very first day of their marriage, she gave Howard half of her wealth. Just as Howard was basking in his triumph, the butler handed him another anonymous letter, once again warning him of impending danger if he didn't stop. Since his partner was dead, Howard kept wondering who could be sending these letters. This time, Howard suspected that the matchmaking agency worker was the one threatening him, so without hesitation, he killed the worker as well. Knowing that his crimes would soon be exposed, Howard planned to kill the old lady that very night. He prepared a bottle of poisoned wine, just as he had done before. The loyal butler, however, had been investigating Howard's recent activities and confronted him, revealing that he had discovered Howard was a cold-blooded killer who preyed on wealthy old women. The butler threatened to go to the police unless Howard left the old lady alone. Howard, dismissive of the elderly butler, caught him off guard and broke his chick neck. After disposing of the butler, Howard poured the poisoned wine for the old lady. The two toasted, exchanging sweet words, and the unsuspecting old lady drank it all. She clutched her chest and collapsed in front of Howard, who coldly watched her die. Just like before, Howard picked up the phone to call an ambulance. But to his shock, the old lady suddenly got up. While he was still on the phone, Howard used his free hand to push her down the stairs. This time, she was truly dead. After finishing the job, Howard packed his things, ready to move somewhere where no one knew him and enjoy his life. But just then, he received another anonymous letter. Howard was furious. He followed the address on the letter and arrived at the cemetery where he discovered that the letter sender was the cemetery worker. It turns out the worker had the ability to communicate with spirits, and from the old lady's ghost, he had learned of Howard's crimes. He intended to use this information to warn Howard to turn back, but the evil Howard, already numb to murder, decided one more kill wouldn't make a difference. So he brutally killed the cemetery worker as well. He planned to hide the worker's body in the old lady's coffin, but when he opened it, he found that the old lady's body was gone. It turned out that the vengeful old lady had returned as a zombie, bringing with her all the other old women Howard had killed to seek revenge. In life, Howard had been their companion. In death, they couldn't leave him either. Howard, who had never believed in ghosts, was now terrified. The story ends with Howard's chicken screams echoing in the night. The second story begins with the handsome George and his colleague Sophie working together in a research lab. George has diabetes and needs to inject insulin daily. Their co-worker, Pack, stormed back into the lab, furious that George had disclosed their discovery of a new type of cell to the media without their consent. George even claimed that the new cell was ready for human trials, even though the research was still immature and injecting it directly could kill the volunteers. George brushed off the concerns, believing that starting human trials early would secure more funding and make them famous. This selfish attitude led to a huge argument between George and Pack. That evening, George found Sophie drinking at a bar. From their conversation, it became clear that George's eagerness for quick results had caused a lot of trouble for the lab. On top of that, he was also a notorious womanizer. While they appeared to be ordinary colleagues in public, George and Sophie were secretly intimate. Sophie was furious at George's heartless behavior, but felt powerless to stop him. After some persuasion from Sophie, George reluctantly apologized to Pack and even made him a cup of coffee. At work, George was very careless, often storing his insulin alongside the lab's experimental drugs in the same refrigerator. That day, as usual, Sophie injected George with insulin. However, it was only after the injection that they realized Pack had grabbed the wrong vial. What they had injected into George wasn't insulin, but the newly developed cells they had been researching. The injection contained billions of cytokines, far exceeding the safe dosage. As Pack had previously warned George, the new cells were extremely unstable. Without an antidote, the subject would soon develop tumors all over their body and die. This news hit George like a ton of bricks, and he collapsed to the ground in fear. He could feel the new cells coursing through his veins, spreading throughout his body. At this rate, he would be dead within a few hours. Determined to enjoy the little time he had left, George began to experience hallucinations, seeing everyone around him as monstrous creatures covered in tumors, just as he feared he would soon become. A bartender approached George for a chat, mentioning that he had just seen Sophie and Pack drinking together, celebrating something. Hearing this, George became unhinged, convinced that Pack and Sophie were conspiring against him. When George returned home, he received a voicemail from Pack, asking him to come to the lab as he had something important to tell him. George rushed to the lab where Pack was printing out some documents, but before Pack could say a word, George struck him on the head, venting his anger. As the weakened Pack tried to explain, the deranged George injected a lethal dose of the new cells directly into his heart, killing him instantly. After the deed was done, George dragged Pack's body through the streets and alleys, stumbling up a flight of stairs until he reached the police station. He explained the entire story to the police, claiming that he was about to die a painful death and begged them to end his misery with a bullet. By the time Sophie arrived, she was too late. Seeing Pack's lifeless body, she cursed George as an idiot, saying they never injected him with the new cells. It was just a prank. It turned out that Pack and Sophie had found George to be too selfish, so they decided to teach him a lesson, to show him how dangerous it was to use untested drugs on humans. Pack had planned to meet with George to explain everything, but he never got the chance before George killed him. Now that George knew the truth, he was filled with regret. But it was too late. His fate would be the electric chair. The third story begins with Danny and his partner, who were the lead singers of the Exorcist band, and they were very popular in their town. One day, after finishing a song, Danny suddenly announced that he was kicking his partner out of the band for the reason that his partner had gotten married, and Danny even dragged his partner's wife, Scarlett, on stage to insult her smelly parts. The partner was furious at Danny for humiliating his wife in public. After the show, the two had a heated argument backstage. Danny felt betrayed, thinking that they were supposed to stay single forever, even though everyone else thought he was overreacting. But their friend, Vendetta, didn't think so. She fully supported Danny and even showed off her own tattoo, a very realistic-looking snake. Danny was intrigued by Vendetta's tattoo, and before long, the two of them were entangled in a passionate hormone yoga session. Danny, his partner, and Scarlett all lived under the same roof, so they couldn't avoid each other. Danny, growing more irritable, often verbally abused his partner's wife at home. Scarlett tried to talk to Danny, hoping to resolve things since she didn't want Danny and her husband to fall out given their partnership. But Danny was in a hurry to go get a new tattoo with Vendetta and didn't have time to listen. Vendetta took Danny to a mysterious alley where the tattoo shop had a strange atmosphere. The place was more like a site for voodoo rituals than a tattoo parlor, with a green Chinese dragon displayed on the table. The tattoo artist asked Danny to remove his clothes and then started mocking Danny's taste. The tattoo artist explained that he didn't custom design tattoos. Instead, the designs he inked were drawn directly from the customer's mind. His technique was also quite unusual, involving tapping Danny's body with 2 sticks. Danny thought the tattoo artist must be making a lot of money. The artist said he made $1 million from just 1 tattoo last year. Danny wondered if he had found himself a rich customer. The tattoo artist denied it, explaining that last year, a customer wasn't happy with the tattoo he gave him. So the customer smashed up his shop, blinded him in one eye, then paid him $1 million in compensation. After some while, Danny's tattoo was finally finished, but he was far from satisfied. The tattoo artist had inked Scarlett's face on his hairy chest. Scarlett, the woman Danny despised the most. The tattoo artist explained that the tattoo reflected what was in Danny's heart, and it was beyond his control. Furious, Danny stormed out without paying, cursing all the way home. But as soon as he got home, he ran into his partner's wife, Scarlett. She told Danny that if he didn't let go of his grudges, she would convince her husband to leave the band. In her eyes, her husband was young and talented, and he'd do just fine on his own. Danny believed that Scarlett was trying to drive a wedge between him and his partner, and began hurling insults at her. Later, at the bar, Danny ran into Vendetta, the woman who had taken him to get the tattoo. Danny showed her the tattoo, and even Vendetta was shocked by it. She apologized and promised to help Danny get rid of the troublesome tattoo. However, the tattoo seemed to have become an inseparable part of Danny. Despite undergoing a painful procedure, the tattoo couldn't be fully removed. Frustrated, Vendetta suggested a terrible idea. If he couldn't get rid of the tattoo, maybe he could get rid of Scarlett instead. That night, while his partner was busy rehearsing, Danny sneaked into Scarlett's room and brutally murdered her while she was in the naked shower. But Scarlett's death brought Danny no relief. Instead, the tattoo, which had been partially removed, became even more prominent. Even the face of Scarlett on his chest had morphed into a gruesome image of her at the moment of her death. Strangely, Vendetta couldn't see any of this. Danny began to lose his mind backstage, but with the show about to start, Vendetta convinced him to go on stage. However, halfway through the performance, Danny felt something writhing under his skin. Terrified, he was forced to stop the show, unleashing his anger on Vendetta before locking himself in the dressing room. Danny felt an intense pain in his chest as a dragon emerged from his tattoo. He fought desperately with the dragon. His partner, hearing his screams, burst into the dressing room and nearly fainted at the sight. Danny had used shards of a mirror to cut the tattooed skin from his body. Laughing maniacally, Danny declared that he had finally gotten rid of Scarlett. The fourth story begins with a pair of con artists, Benjamin and Allison. One day, the two decided to scam a tycoon, telling him that his long-deceased uncle had left behind a large inheritance. Allison posed as the tycoon's long-lost cousin, his uncle's daughter, while Benjamin played her lawyer. The tycoon soon arrived as planned and was immediately captivated by his long-lost cousin. Following their script, Benjamin began explaining the details of the inheritance. Naturally, such a clumsy ruse wouldn't fool the tycoon. So Allison tried a different tactic. She invited the tycoon to her room to discuss the inheritance in private. They had already hidden Benjamin in the closet, ready to snap compromising photos of the two to blackmail the tycoon into cooperating. The tycoon, who was clearly interested, understood the invitation and took off his wedding ring as soon as he entered the room. Allison played her favorite song, one the tycoon had never heard before. She told him it was her favorite tune, and then, while he was in high spirits, suggested that if he invested $150,000 to buy out her father's remaining shares, he would see a threefold return within a year. Completely smitten, the tycoon agreed to everything Allison said. Meanwhile, hidden in the closet, Benjamin managed to capture some compromising photos of the two's best hormone yoga poses. The next morning, the tycoon brought $150,000 to Benjamin's office. Seeing the stack of cash, Benjamin couldn't help but hum Allison's favorite tune. The tycoon, however, was sharp. He grew suspicious of their scheme. Realizing Plan A had failed, Benjamin and Allison quickly moved to Plan B. Benjamin showed the tycoon the photos from the previous night and threatened to send them to his wife if he didn't pay up. To their surprise, the tycoon simply smiled and said his wife would never see these photos. With that, he took his money and left. Their plan had been so close to success, only to be ruined by Benjamin's carelessness. Furious at her wasted efforts, Allison lamented if all her hormone sacrifice was for nothing. Just as they were at their wits' end, fate intervened. The tycoon, distracted by a faulty elevator, took a misstep and fell into the elevator shaft. Though he survived the fall, the elevator car soon descended, and with a final scream, he was gone for good. The tycoon's death meant the money was lost too, and Benjamin and Allison decided to go their separate ways. However, they were soon approached by the tycoon's wife, who was blind. It turned out that when the tycoon said his wife would never see the photos, he wasn't lying. She was blind. But this turned out to be an advantage. During their conversation, Benjamin and Allison learned that the wife was highly superstitious and had already arranged for a medium to hold a seance the next evening to contact her husband's spirit. Benjamin and Allison exchanged glances, and a wicked plan began to take shape. Benjamin and Allison kidnapped the medium that the tycoon's wife had hired. To Allison, mediums were just as much frauds as they were. No one was more virtuous than the other. So Allison knocked the medium out and decided to impersonate her to deceive the tycoon's wife, while Benjamin would pretend to be the spirit of the dead husband. They planned that Benjamin, draped in a black robe, would slowly emerge and demand that the wife hand over all her money. They were confident that the blind woman would obey without question. The wife arrived at the seance with her servant in tow. Allison began to put on a show, pretending to summon spirits. Following their rehearsed script, Benjamin slowly emerged from the darkness. However, something was off. Benjamin's voice was eerily cold and chilling, sending shivers down their spines to their butts. He produced a box, and to everyone's horror, inside it was Benjamin's severed head. It turned out that Benjamin had already been killed, and the figure in the black robe was the devil tycoon. The two con artists had no understanding of the dark forces they were meddling with. A seance is not something ordinary people should dabble in. The devil tycoon sneered as he reached into Allison's chest, ripping out her greasy heart before the eyes of his wife and servant. It seems Allison wasn't as heartless as she appeared after all. The fifth story begins with a commercial actress named Helen. One day she auditioned for a perfume ad, and the director was very pleased with her performance, confidently telling her she would get the role. However, a few days later, Helen received news from her agent that the role had gone to her roommate instead. Helen was furious by that. She was convinced that her roommate must have slept with the director to get the role. No matter how much her agent tried to explain, Helen was certain that her roommate was a slut who had slept her way to the top. When she got home, Helen lashed out at her roommate. In reality, her roommate had no idea she had been selected for the role. Helen wanted to kick her out, but since the apartment belonged to the roommate, it was generous enough that she wasn't the one being thrown out. The roommate was beautiful and constantly landed advertising roles. Now, she even had an invitation to a beauty pageant. The thought of it made Helen fume with jealousy. Helen opened the bathroom cabinet, fumbled around, and eventually grabbed a bottle with a skull label. She planned to drug her roommate and knock her sexy body out. Pretending to apologize, she offered her roommate a cup of tea laced with the drug. Suspecting nothing, she drank it all and immediately collapsed on the bed, unconscious. Helen stole the invitation to the beauty pageant, planning to take her roommate's place. She muttered to herself that by the time her roommate woke up, she would be the pageant champion. However, she didn't realize she had used the wrong drug and had actually poisoned her roommate to death. Helen tried to resuscitate her, but after failing, she forged a suicide note to make it look like her roommate had taken her own life due to depression. Rather than feeling guilty about accidentally killing her roommate, Helen took the invitation and went to see the pageant host, who assured her that she was now the front-runner for the crown. Their conversation was overheard by another rival contestant, who then confronted Helen in the dressing room, calling her shameless for sleeping her way to the top. The rival accused Helen of being no better than someone who resorts to underhanded tactics. But like Helen, weak people always find excuses for their shortcomings. The host had told Helen that the pageant wasn't just about looks. They were looking for inner beauty. At the competition, Helen was the final contestant to take the stage. The host asked her what's the most guilt-ridden thing she had ever done. Helen replied that she had never done anything to feel guilty about because she never regretted her actions. This, of course, implied that she felt no remorse for her roommate's death. During the intermission, Helen noticed the host and the rival whispering suspiciously. The host then tore up Helen's recommendation letter, declaring that she was no longer the predetermined champion. Helen realized that the rival must have sabotaged her. She confronted the rival, demanding to know what underhanded tactics she had used to steal the crown. It turned out that the rival had threatened the host, saying she would expose the pageant's shady dealings to the media. To avoid scandal, the host had no choice but to name the rival contestant the new champion. Enraged, Helen strangled the rival with a rope. Now that all obstacles were out of the way, the crown would surely be hers. She hid the rival's body, and with the rival missing, the host once again offered the championship to Helen. Overjoyed, Helen headed to the winner's dressing room, expecting luxury, but it was far from what she had imagined. The makeup artist casually remarked that she had got great bone structure as he puffed on a cigarette. Displeased with the makeup artist's rough manner, Helen didn't notice the host approaching with a syringe in hand. They pinned Helen down and forcefully injected her with a substance. The host said she was going to look beautiful in no time, as Helen screamed and struggled, but it was too late. In a cruel twist, Helen was gutted and turned into a human specimen. It turned out that the pageant's organizers and audience were a group of wealthy perverts, and the inner beauty they sought was, quite literally, the inner organs of beautiful women. Helen was given 2 chances to stay out of harm's way, but she insisted on walking right into her doom, and so she should blame nobody but herself for that. The 6th story begins with a restaurant owner running a squid-only restaurant. Due to the limited menu, the small shop's business has never been great. The exasperated wife grabbed a knife to attack the owner, but the owner said the knife was made of rare metal and the factory has already stopped production, making it very precious. The young waiter suggested the owner was stubborn in selling only squid. The town sheriff is a regular customer at the restaurant, but even he is tired of the endless squid. It seems the owner really should consider changing the menu. One night, the owner's wife brought the remaining squid to the young waiter, who has long been secretly in love with the owner's wife. He persuaded her to leave her shitty husband and run away with him. The wife calmly took out a gun from her bag, implying she just wants the waiter to mind his own business. As business kept declining, the owner fell 3 months behind on rent. The furious landlord came demanding payment, mocking and taunting the owner. The owner couldn't hold back and got into an argument, ending up slashing the landlord's hand with a knife. The dispute was witnessed by the waiter lurking outside. The anxious owner returned home, hoping his wife could provide more money to support the restaurant. But the wife helplessly said they were deeply in debt and would soon be homeless. Just as the shop was about to go under, the wife discovered some steaks in the fridge. The waiter said he had found a supplier for the meat. As the wife was cooking the steaks, the sheriff told them the landlord was missing. There was blood at the scene, but no body was found. The aroma of the steaks attracted more customers. Even the picky sheriff praised the delicious steaks. As more people came, the steaks soon ran out. In front of the owner, the waiter opened the freezer, revealing the landlord's body hanging inside. He calmly cut a piece of meat from the body. The owner was horrified, realizing the waiter had killed the landlord. The waiter said it's a dog-eat-dog world. You need to be ruthless to make money. Seeing the business thriving and even his wife loving the steaks, the owner wanted to report it, but the waiter warned him that others had seen the owner fighting with the landlord, so the owner would be the prime suspect if reported. They agreed the waiter would provide the ingredients while the owner would do the cooking, splitting the profits. The business boomed, with long lines outside, until one day the sheriff told them the police found a special alloy in the landlord's blood samples from a discontinued specialty knife set. Hearing this, the owner broke out in a cold sweat, because that alloy was from his own butcher knife. The evil waiter, to avoid suspicion, went to the oblivious wife, falsely accusing the owner of killing people and selling the meat, claiming he was just an innocent bystander. He then stole the wife's gun, intending to kill the owner and frame him. But the wife's gun was never loaded with real bullets. The couple easily overpowered the cunning waiter. Just then, the sheriff arrived at the restaurant. The waiter desperately appealed to him for help, but the sheriff coolly said he was addicted to the steaks and was looking for a job after retiring soon. So as long as the waiter was eliminated, he could become the restaurant's new partner. With the sheriff's tacit approval, the waiter was placed on the scorching hot grill, becoming the restaurant's freshest ingredient. The 7th story begins with Dr. Allen, a child psychologist who hosts a radio show about children's mental health. However, due to poor ratings, the show's producer plans to replace it with another program. This decision leaves Dr. Allen feeling frustrated. One day, while hosting the show, a listener named Nora calls in, saying her daughter has severe psychological issues. She likes to tinker with electronics, screams at the slightest provocation, and even bangs her head against the wall. This case gives Allen an idea. To boost the show's ratings, he decides to visit Nora's home, treat her daughter, and turn the process into a special episode. The next morning, Dr. Allen, his assistant, and the producer head to Nora's home, which is located in a desolate area. Confidently, the doctor claims that while the child's psychological issues are serious, there's no case he can't handle. He warns that the child likes to tinker with electronics, so everyone should be cautious. The producer dismisses his concerns and grabs the door handle, sarcastically questioning Alan's caution. As the door slowly opens, Nora excitedly welcomes them. Nora is a strange-looking petite woman, almost childlike in appearance. At that moment, the sound of a child's screams echoes from upstairs. Nora tries to calm the child down with some bubblegum, but Dr. Allen stops her, insisting that indulging the child will only worsen her behavior. Instead, he believes the best approach is to ignore her tantrums. He then starts promoting his own books to Nora, who reveals that she already owns a copy, along with an entire bookshelf filled with works on child psychology, including books by the renowned child psychologist. Nora mentions that while the child psychologist was great, his theories don't apply to her child. The producer picks up a photo from the table, and Nora explains that the man in the picture is her husband's commander. The photo, however, clearly shows World War II General Douglas MacArthur. Stubbornly, Nora insists she's still waiting for them to return from the battlefield. This bizarre statement makes everyone realize that Nora's mind isn't entirely stable. The masked child suddenly dashes upstairs and the group decides to investigate. Nora mentions that her child loves bubblegum, and the hallway upstairs is littered with chewed gum, which disgusts the assistant. The producer notices the child running and follows her up to the attic. When she opens the attic door, the sight inside makes her scream in terror, and she is immediately attacked. Meanwhile, Dr. Allen is busy searching through books for ways to deal with the unruly child. When they enter the child's room, they find a mix of adult electronics and children's toys, indicating that the child's mental state is caught between adulthood and childhood. Dr. Allen quickly concludes that there is no unruly child. The masked child is actually a split personality of the mother, Nora. Dr. Allen and his assistant discuss how splitting this episode into multiple parts would skyrocket their ratings. However, they are horrified when they discover the producer's lifeless body in the room. It turns out that Nora not only suffers from dissociative identity disorder, but is also a killer. Realizing the danger, the two decide they must escape immediately. The front door is locked, so the only way out is through the back, which leads up to the attic. A creepy ceiling fan hangs ominously above. Just then, the masked child appears downstairs. Dr. Allen tries to reason with her, promising that he can cure her, but she runs away. Upstairs, the assistant begins to criticize Allen for being all talk and no action, and just as she does, the ceiling fan suddenly falls, killing her instantly. The assistant's heavy body lands on Dr. Allen, knocking him unconscious. When Dr. Allen regains consciousness, he finds himself tied up in the attic. Nora, worried sick about her child, expresses her belief that the doctor can cure her daughter. After Nora leaves, the masked child enters the attic. At first, she seems docile and even unties Dr. Allen, but as soon as he's free, he grabs her by the throat, screaming that she is a split personality freak. However, it's then revealed that Nora doesn't have dissociative identity disorder, and her daughter isn't a child at all. She's a 40-something-year-old woman who remains a child mentally. With an unattractive appearance, she's never dared to show her real face. Over the years, Nora had invited countless child psychologists to treat her daughter. However, these so-called experts were all talk and no action, never putting their theories into practice. As a result, they were all tortured to death by the mother-daughter duo in the attic. Now, it's Dr. Allen's turn. He had boasted on the radio that he could cure Nora's daughter, but if he fails, his fate will be the same as the other experts. The 8th story begins with Billy, a notorious criminal with a long list of crimes to his name. He and his partner, pursued by a posse, find themselves in a desolate wilderness. After days of fleeing, his severely injured partner collapses, unable to go any further. Billy decides to end his partner's suffering and buries him by the roadside. Meanwhile, Officer Tom, leading the posse, catches up to them. After a week-long chase, both sides are exhausted. Eventually, Billy and Tom cross paths in a remote town. By this point, Billy is the last man standing. Despite being on opposite sides, Tom respects Billy's character, and they agree to settle things with a duel. Unfortunately for Tom, Billy is much quicker on the draw, and Tom falls to Billy's bald gun. After the duel, Billy walks into a bar where a magician playing cards catches his attention. The magician offers Billy a bottle of a mysterious potion, claiming that it will make him faster and stronger. To show his sincerity, the magician offers Billy the first bottle for free. Figuring he has nothing to lose, Billy drinks it down in one gulp. Soon after, Billy begins to hallucinate. He sees a man sitting nearby who looks exactly like the one he shot dead not long ago. Then he spots his partner, whom he had shot himself. In disbelief, Billy rubs his eyes, but when he looks up again, he sees Officer Tom, the man he had just killed in the duel. The entire bar is now filled with people who had died by his hand. Even the magician who sold him the potion was among them, an innocent bystander killed by a stray bullet from Billy's gun. Billy realizes these people have returned to seek revenge, but Tom gently tells him that both heaven and hell are peaceful places where everyone now resides, and that Billy doesn't belong in the world of the living anymore. Tom urges Billy to remember what happened after their duel. Stubbornly, Billy refuses to think about it, clutching his head and screaming. When he finally opens his eyes, the ghosts have vanished. Just then, a group of tourists enters the bar, dressed in t-shirts and holding cameras and radios. They can't see Billy. The tour guide begins recounting the story of Billy and Tom. As it turns out, Billy had indeed killed Tom in the duel, but was then gunned down by the posse. Since then, Billy's cries have echoed through the bar every night. The outside world has changed dramatically. The entire town has become a tourist attraction. Yes, Billy is dead. Unable to accept that he's dead as a piece of shit, he became a restless spirit, bound to the place of his death. The other spirits were only trying to take him away. As Billy gazes at the empty bar, he begins to cry, begging the spirits not to leave him alone. From outside, he hears Tom calling for him. Wiping away his tears, Billy steps out of the bar, finding himself back at the moment of the duel. Once again, Billy and Tom draw their guns, and Tom falls to Billy's shot. But this time, the posse arrives immediately, surrounding Billy. Instead of fleeing, Billy charges at them head-on, taking on 100 guns by himself. He dies in a hail of bullets. The posse then poses for a photo with Billy's corpse before burying him alongside Officer Tom. Billy finally remembers how he died and follows the spirits as they leave. Even though nearly a century has passed, the enemies of his past life now walk together in laughter, their rivalry long forgotten. With a jug of wine, they meet again in friendship. History is full of tales that fade into laughter over time. We are all just dust in the grand scheme of things, and it's up to future generations to judge our actions. The ninth story begins with a gangster, Billy, who is the hottest racer on the streets, undefeated in countless races. The consequences of street racing, from car repairs to funerals, have inadvertently supported the sparse population of his small town. Joe, the town's sheriff, is also a retired legendary racer. Though he has long left his wild days behind to give his beautiful daughter a peaceful life, she unfortunately lacks good judgment and falls for the bad boy type, like Billy. Despite conquering all local rivals, Billy is restless without a worthy opponent. He seeks out Joe, hoping to lure him back to the racing scene for one last thrilling match. However, Joe, now aged, sees no reason to risk his life for a young adrenaline junkie's game. After repeated refusals, Billy resorts to intimidation, stuffing a thick envelope and a large spider into Joe's mailbox as a threat. The next morning, Joe finds the spider and the envelope in his mailbox. Unfazed, he crushes the spider with his bare foot. The envelope, however, contains dark secrets from Joe's past, revealing a manslaughter charge he escaped years ago through lies and false testimony. Billy's provocations escalate, forcing Joe to pursue him in his police car. But Billy's modified racer easily outpaces the standard police vehicle, leaving Joe fuming. Returning home, Joe is shocked to find Billy's car parked outside. He rushes upstairs, only to find his daughter hastily dressing and a shirtless Billy. Billy then blackmails Joe, threatening to expose his long-hidden crime, which could land him a 5-year sentence. If Joe were jailed, Billy would be free to do as he pleases with his daughter, unless Joe agrees to race him. Billy leaves, and to Joe's dismay, his brainless daughter decides to run away with Billy, who then kidnaps her sexy body, using her as leverage against her father. To save his daughter, Joe agrees to the race and finds his old friend who has kept his racing car maintained, knowing Joe would return. They meet Billy at the agreed location where Billy honorably returns Joe's daughter. Enraged at Billy's actions, the girl wishes she could kill him. Joe, now reassured, appoints his daughter as the race's flag girl. Confidently, Joe tells Billy that he has this race in the bag and that Billy will pay with his life. At the daughter's signal, both cars race off. Not long after starting, Joe suddenly slams on the brakes. Billy, inexperienced, crashes into an excavator on the opposite side of the road, destroying his car and sustaining serious injuries. Although Billy considers blowing up his gas tank to take Joe with him, he ultimately incinerates only himself. Joe wins the race and joyfully returns home with his daughter. The 10th story takes place in a town where a serial killer emerged, sending all residents into a state of alarm. Margaret is a young librarian whose boss, the library manager, is a very dominant figure. One day, the manger caught a group of punks doodling on a table and furiously chased them away, ordering Margaret to clean up. While wiping the table, Margaret noticed that the punks had left behind a folding knife. Thinking of the town's poor safety, she discreetly pocketed the knife. This action was witnessed by a bespectacled young man at the next table. Despite the presence of a serial killer still at large, the unsympathetic manager forced them to work overtime. As a timid, single woman, Margaret didn't want to stay late, but to keep her job, she endured. Later, she encountered the customer with glasses again. He approached her, discussing the recent serial killings and speculating that the killer would likely target vulnerable, single women like her next. This scared Margaret to the point of nearly collapsing, but she managed to get away from him. The manager then sent her alone to clean the dark basement. In the basement, Margaret thought she saw a man stabbing wildly. Terrified, she rushed to find the security guard for help. However, after searching the basement, they found no sign of the killer Margaret described. The guard reassured her, saying, "It's just them two here, very safe," but his sinister smile only frightened her more. She hurried out of the basement and into the manager's office. It turned out that the scene Margaret had witnessed was just a punk scratching old books. The manager, dismissing her fears, refused Margaret's suggestion to fire the security guard and hire more reliable guards. As someone easily frightened, Margaret was constantly on edge, suspecting everyone of plotting against her. The manager thought she was just overly scared and rejected her request. After the manager and the guard left for the night, leaving Margaret to lock up, she didn't realize that the man with glasses hadn't left. He was slightly obsessed with studying serial killers and had developed a new theory that the killer would likely wear glasses and a long coat, essentially describing himself. Knowing how fearful Margaret was, he still incessantly scared her. Now, alone in the library, Margaret heard frantic knocking at the door. A strong man in a black hat shouted for her to open up, sending her into a panic. She tried to call for help, but the phone wouldn't work. Margaret had to cut the power and hide, shivering and wetting herself in a corner until the manager returned from going out for a late snack. The manager scolded her for being easily startled, explaining that the knocking was just a customer who had left a book behind. As for the phone, the manager had deliberately disconnected it earlier, fearing that the ring might scare Margaret at night. The manager reassured her, knowing the serial killings had everyone on edge, but insisting the library was very safe. She even joked, asking her why she always thinks the killer is a man. It could be a woman. This comment broke Margaret's last mental defense. She thought the manager was the killer because she intentionally arranged for the security guard to leave and make her stay alone. Before the manager could explain, a terrified Margaret pulled out her folding knife and began stabbing her, insisting that the manager, like others, had been stalking her. The innocent manager died confused, while Margaret, muttering to herself, concluded that the entire town made her uneasy because it was riddled with crime. Under multiple stresses, Margaret finally snapped, her paranoia turning her into what she feared most. As for who the real serial killer is, the episode leaves it unclear. However, there isn't just one killer. The news of the serial killer has the whole town terrified, and this growing fear is contagious, turning countless scared individuals like Margaret into killers themselves, all in the name of self-defense. The 11th story begins with a man, Vic, who is a remorseless scammer. One day he encounters a gambler whose child is seriously ill. Without any compassion, he deceitfully takes the money meant for the child's medical treatment and quickly spends it on prostitutes. However, Vic isn't really fond of this lifestyle. From a young age, he has been particularly sensitive to the number 2 and always fantasized about having a pair of beautiful twins as his companions. One day, Vic's car gets a flat tire near a strange-looking house, which catches his attention. He enters the house uninvited, seeking help. The house is luxuriously decorated, with a photo of an architect on the table. Suddenly, a young and beautiful woman walks in holding a gun. Then another woman, identical in appearance, joins the scene to see what's happening. Vic realizes these are the twin sisters he has always dreamed of. To get close to the sisters, Vic starts lying, claiming he knows their architect father and praising the house extensively. This quickly lowers the sisters' guard. They mention that after their father's death, they inherited $2 billion. However, due to their naive and trusting nature, they are often deceived, which is why they are usually very wary of strangers. In his quest to gain access to the sisters' fortune, Vic begins visiting them regularly. His humor and attentive care quickly win them over, and soon he proposes marriage. However, marrying just one would mean only obtaining half of the fortune. To secure it all, he would need to marry both sisters. So, Vic starts another lie, claiming he has a twin brother who is always away on business in Africa. He says that to keep the business going, he and his brother switch places every month. Vic pretends to go to Africa to switch with his brother, then returns in a hip-hop outfit to play with the sisters. His acting is superb, and the brother he portrays has a completely different personality from his own. This way, Vic alternates between being himself and his brother each month, eventually succeeding in marrying both sisters. After the wedding, Vic continues his monthly switch, spending his days swimming and sunbathing. The happy sisters look at Vic and sigh, wishing their husbands could be with them at the same time. When the day to switch roles comes again, one sister, while helping Vic pack, complains about not being taken to Africa. During their conversation, she notices a suntan mark on Vic's back. Later, while chatting, the other sister mentions that her husband has the same exact mark. Their husbands' similar hobbies and habits raise suspicions. They began to suspect that their husbands might be the same person. The sisters rush back to their room and find a fake braid Vic uses when he plays his brother, almost driving them to rage. Unaware of their discovery, Vic gets dressed, ready to take the sisters out for dinner. He finds a drawer, usually kept locked, wide open. Inside are old newspaper clippings revealing that, apart from being wealthy and beautiful, the sisters are also psychopathic. What's more, their wealthy architect father was actually killed by them. Although the police couldn't find evidence, the sisters were released without charges. As Vic reels from the shock, the sisters, having silently moved behind him, knock him out with a gun butt. When he wakes up, he finds himself tied to the bed. The sisters, revealing their twisted nature, tell Vic they enjoy sharing everything equally, including their father. Now that Vic's deception is uncovered, they see no choice but to divide him as well. Thus, the scammer Vic is literally split in half, achieving a grim sort of equality. The 12th story begins with an old man, Joseph, who was once a renowned puppeteer. But as mechanical puppets became more convenient, the demand for traditional marionette shows waned, leaving him jobless. Coco, Joseph's puppet, is a mystery, as it seems to converse with Joseph daily. His wife, Ellen, dismisses these interactions as mere delusions from staying indoors too much. Ellen, young and beautiful, is mostly concerned with her own leisure and neglects Joseph, who suffers from severe heart disease. One day, Joseph receives an invitation to perform in a nostalgic show on the radio, which elates him. However, Ellen dampens his spirits by belittling the opportunity, saying it won't be his big comeback. Despite her coldness, Ellen arranges for a helper named David to assist Joseph. Joseph, with Coco in tow, impresses David with a unique performance, despite David's preference for the more robust mechanical puppets. Joseph insists that puppets are alive and must become a part of the puppeteer. Joseph is a true master, and his sincerity convinces David to stay. On a Tuesday, when Ellen leaves for a performance class, something she's less than thrilled to attend with Joseph, Coco suggests that Ellen might be having an affair. Although Joseph verbally trusts his wife, he's internally unsettled and dives back into his work. While Joseph gets along well with David, Ellen starts causing trouble, disliking any changes David makes to Joseph's scripts, even though Joseph is pleased with them. Her nagging causes Joseph heart pain, but after calming down, he confides in David about his suspicions of an affair. Sympathetically, David offers to investigate during her performance class, which he thought was on Wednesdays, revealing that Ellen has been lying about her class days for almost a year to meet her lover. Ellen's meddling infuriates her, and she kicks David out. Determined to uncover her lover, Joseph searches her belongings and finds love letters from the lover. Coco was right. Women can be untrustworthy. Seeing Joseph drown his sorrows in alcohol, Coco vows to avenge him. Joseph thinks nothing of it until the next morning when he finds Coco has escaped. Then, Ellen's screams from outside lead him to a horrific scene. Coco, knife in hand, is stabbing Ellen relentlessly. Shocked, Joseph suffers a fatal heart attack. After Joseph's death, David emerges, revealing the puppet Coco to be his mechanical creation. David, Ellen's lover, had intentionally exacerbated Joseph's fears to hasten his death. The real marionette Coco had been hidden away. Joseph's belief in Coco speaking was dismissed as hallucinations from isolation. David leaves Ellen to clean up, but finds himself turned into a puppet by Coco. The next morning, the police discover a scene they've never encountered before. The deceitful couple turned into marionettes, staged on the bed, with a puppet Coco sporting Joseph's face hanging above them. The 13th story takes place in a dark forest at midnight, where a man is running for his shitty life. Unfortunately, he is quickly caught by a werewolf who brutally snaps his neck. The scene then shifts to the man's grieving family in a hotel. One of the guests, a bespectacled man, complains that this is the third victim killed at the mountain lodge. The guests are anxious to leave, but a storm has destroyed the road down the mountain, leaving them stranded. The hotel's butler admits that there is indeed a werewolf on the mountain. However, he reassures the guests that there is a hunter among them who will soon put an end to the werewolf's reign of terror. One of the guests, a bald man, isn't convinced. He just wants to escape as quickly as possible, valuing his bald life above all else. Just then, a man named Lokai arrives at the hotel. He's the hunter the hotel hired, though he originally came to the lodge for some relaxation. Now he's taken on the job of killing the werewolf as well. Later, Lokai encounters another guest, a beautiful and seductive woman named Janice. He is immediately captivated by her cold yet alluring demeanor, and they hit it off. Janice invites Lokai to her room after midnight for some intimate hormone yoga session. Of course, this yoga session is code for taking a bath together and perhaps snuggling under the covers to look at a glow-in-the-dark watch. Lokai is thrilled and promises to meet her at midnight. The next morning, Lokai heads to the dining hall for breakfast and notices that the bald guest who was so eager to leave the hotel earlier has gone missing with his bald head. Lokai finds him in the forest, trying to escape. The werewolf scare has everyone on edge, so when the bald man pulls a bald gun on Lokai, Lokai swiftly ends his bald life in self-defense. Thinking out loud, Lokai concludes that the bald man must have been a hitman disguised as the werewolf, planning to kill and then flee. But just then, the hotel bellboy informs Lokai that he's received a fax from the police identifying the bald man as a Nazi war criminal, not a werewolf at all. Lokai realizes he has killed the wrong person. As the sun sets, the guests become restless, knowing that the werewolf will strike again once night falls. Lokai notices that one person is missing from the group. It's Janice, the sexy woman he met the night before. He searches her room for her sexy body, but finds no trace of her smell. In the center of the hall sits a grand piano, impossible to miss. The bellboy tells Lokai that Janice only appears at midnight, which might suggest that Janice is the werewolf. Deep in the night, Lokai, gun in hand, returns to Janice's room. A full moon hangs high in the sky. He expects to find Janice, but instead undergoes a horrifying transformation himself. Collapsing to the floor, he screams in agony as he realizes that he is the real werewolf. Every night, he turns into a beast and kills one of the guests, only to return to his human form the next day, completely unaware of his actions. In his werewolf state, Lokai loses control and brutally kills a maid in the room. The maid's blood seeps into the piano, piquing Lokai's curiosity. He opens the piano and discovers that it houses a coffin filled with dirt. Before he can process this, Janice appears to flex her skinny figure and plunges a silver candlestick into his heart. It turns out that Janice is a vampire, and the piano is her traveling coffin. Werewolves and vampires have been bitter enemies for centuries. Janice muses that their intimate yoga session will have to wait and suggests they just have breakfast together instead. The 14th story begins with an elderly couple, Jack and Cynthia, who can barely stand each other anymore after decades of bickering. After dinner, Cynthia starts complaining that the meal wasn't good enough, especially the bland vegetable juice they've been drinking daily. She snaps if her husband suddenly turned religious or something. Jack, trying to keep his cool, explains that the juice is a healthy recipe he and his friend Harry discovered, and it's good for Cynthia's health. But Cynthia isn't having it, and their argument quickly escalates into a physical fight, startling their pet dog. It seems even the poor dog has been stuck eating vegetarian with them lately. Their heated argument reaches the ears of Harry and his wife, who are camping nearby. Harry's wife grumbles about how Jack ever ended up with such a shrew. It turns out that both couples are on this camping trip to perform a mysterious ritual, and the food Cynthia has been complaining about is actually a specially prepared potion. Because they feared Cynthia's fiery temper might ruin everything, they hadn't told her the truth. Jack is starting to regret bringing Cynthia along, but she's not done causing trouble, continuing to hurl insults at her husband until he finally pulls out his vodka. Harry quickly snatches the bottle away, warning him that even a drop would ruin everything. This puzzles Cynthia even more. What kind of strange ritual involves vegetarian food and abstaining from alcohol? After calming down, Harry leads Jack into the forest, where they unearth the remains of Harry's ex-wife. He had planted several ancient bulbs in her mouth. Suspicious, Cynthia secretly follows them and, upon seeing the skeleton, mistakenly believes her husband plans to kill her and bury her there. In a panic, she bolts like a Tesla bike, suddenly moving as fast as she did in her youth despite her usual creaky joints. Meanwhile, Jack and Harry retrieve the skeleton and place it under the moonlight, where the bulbs begin to grow rapidly. Still terrified, Cynthia continues shouting that her husband is trying to kill her, while Harry and Jack return to the campsite with the strange plants. Jack, now in high spirits, sings joyfully and tells Cynthia she missed out big time because she never listens to him. The three of them then head into the RV, leaving Cynthia outside alone. Not long after, Cynthia hears Harry's wife screaming inside the RV, further convincing her that Jack plans to murder them all. But the truth is quite different. After the screams subside, Harry's wife emerges looking decades younger. She explains to Cynthia that in her tribe, there's a special bulb that can reverse aging, but it needs to be nourished by a corpse to grow. 3 months ago, Harry planted these bulbs in his ex-wife's body. Drinking an herbal concoction mixed with the bulb's essence can make one young again. But one had to drink 2 doses. The first one is very painful, which is why she had been screaming earlier. Excited by the prospect of regaining her youth, Cynthia is eager to take the potion. However, Jack, having had enough of Cynthia's endless nagging and bossiness over the years, destroys the flower that would have made her young again. Furious, Cynthia sneaks back to the campsite and steals a jar of the potion. Seeking revenge, she pours vodka into the remaining potion, knowing that even a drop of alcohol would ruin everything. This act of sabotage could potentially doom everyone involved. After sabotaging the potion, Cynthia hides in the RV, waiting for Jack and Harry's wife to return. She watches as they mix the flower essence into the potion and drink it down. Immediately, all 3 of them begin to scream in agony. Cynthia snatches the rejuvenating flower from their hands, coldly watching as they writhe in pain and eventually turn into mummified corpses before disintegrating into dust. Triumphantly, Cynthia curses Jack, declaring that she'll find a young, fit man now that her husband is out of the picture. She drinks the potion mixed with the flower essence, and while enduring the excruciating pain, she accidentally knocks over the remaining potion, which is quickly licked up by their pet dog. Cynthia successfully becomes about 50 years younger, but she fails to realize that the dog has also been rejuvenated. The newly youthful dog slips out of its collar and viciously attacks the cruel-hearted Cynthia. Hours later, a young couple camping nearby stumbles upon the scene, finding only the now young dog. They have no idea that just a little further away lies Cynthia's mutilated body, torn apart by the very pet she had cared for. And so, this episode comes to an end.